Sparta, 480 BC. The Persian Empire has just invaded Greece with an army of over 100,000 men. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, 300 Spartan warriors have taken position. Their king, Leonidas, has already been told by his own oracle that he will not survive. He came anyway. 3 days later, those 300 men had held back the entire Persian invasion force and saved Western civilization. Not through luck, not through numbers. Through a system of training so brutal that the battle itself was almost easier than what they had already survived. Today, you're going to live every rank of that system. From a 7-year-old boy taken from his mother by the state, to a name that 2,500 years later, every soldier on Earth still knows. Before we rank up, let's kill the biggest myth about Sparta right now. Spartans were not born warriors. They were manufactured. The Agoge, the Spartan state education and training system, was one of the most comprehensive human engineering projects in the ancient world. It began at birth. Spartan elders examined every newborn child. Those deemed too weak or deformed were left exposed on the hillside. Only the strongest survived to enter the system. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. Sparta was a city-state constantly outnumbered, surrounded by potential enemies, and dependent on a slave population 10 times its own size. Every Spartan citizen had to be a warrior. Not because they chose to be, because survival demanded it. 10 ranks, a lifetime of iron discipline, and a warrior culture so extreme it shaped the definition of military excellence for all of human history. Rank 1. Paids, the boys. You are 7 years old. Yesterday you lived with your family. Today you belong to the state. The Agoge stripped away every comfort immediately. One thin cloak. No shoes. No bed. You slept on reeds. You cut yourself from the river. You went hungry deliberately. Not because Sparta couldn't afford food, but because a warrior who could function while starving was more valuable than one who couldn't. They even encouraged you to steal food from the surrounding farms. But if you were caught, you were punished, not for stealing, but for getting caught. The lesson wasn't about theft. It was about stealth, planning, and never making a mistake that could compromise a mission. You also began the most important relationship of your time in the Agoge, your relationship with pain. Rank 2. Meleiren, the young warrior. You are 12. Your body has changed. The soft child who arrived 5 years ago is gone. Now the weapons training begins. Not with real weapons yet, with wooden replicas designed to build muscle memory and technique before anyone trusted you with iron. The core of Spartan combat was the phalanx, a tight formation of warriors with overlapping shields and long spears, moving as one. In phalanx formation, your shield protected not yourself, but the man to your left. His shield protected you. Trust was not optional, it was structural. At this rank, you also began the crypteia, the most controversial element of Spartan training. The crypteia required young Spartans to survive alone in the countryside for extended periods, demonstrating complete self-sufficiency. Those who returned stronger were advancing. Those who didn't return at all, well, the Agoge had its own natural selection. Rank 3. Meleiren, the junior warrior. At 18, you completed the Agoge's most brutal test, the diamastagosis, public flogging at the altar of Artemis. The test was not to see how much pain you could receive. It was to see if you could receive it in silence, without flinching, without showing any sign of weakness. Boys who flinched or cried out were considered to have failed, a social mark that would follow them for life. As an Meleiren, you now supervised younger boys in the Agoge, teaching them by doing exactly what had been done to you. This created a self-reinforcing cycle of excellence. Every generation trained by the last, the standards maintained or improved. You also received your first real weapons, a bronze-tipped Dorophora spear, a short Xiphos sword, and the beginnings of your bronze panoply. These were not given, they were earned, and every Spartan knew exactly what they cost. Rank 4. Hebon, the full warrior. You are 20 years old. You've survived 13 years of the Agoge. You are now a full combat warrior. But you still cannot vote, own property, or eat with your family. For the next 10 years, you would live in the barracks with your unit, your secession, eating, sleeping, and training alongside the same 30 men every single day. The secession was your real family. Spartan society deliberately kept you separated from your biological family to ensure your primary loyalty was to your unit. Your first real battle was not a shock, because the Agoge had made real battle feel almost familiar. The enemy expected to face individual brave warriors. What they got instead was a machine with 30 interlocking parts that moved as one. The psychological impact of a disciplined Spartan phalanx was documented by enemies who outnumbered them 3-1 and still broke and ran. Rank 5. Spherais, the Prime Warrior. You are the thing the Agoge was designed to produce. A fully realized Spartan warrior in his prime. At this rank, the training didn't stop. It intensified. The Spartans developed a training method called the gymnopaidiae. Extended periods of intense physical exercise performed in the brutal Greek summer heat. The logic was consistent with everything else in the system. If you could function at your peak under the worst conditions, the actual battle would be the easiest part of your day. At this rank, the most exceptional warriors were noticed for the hippes, the 300-man royal bodyguard of Sparta, the elite of the elite. Selection to the hippes was considered the greatest honor available to a living Spartan warrior, not death in battle, not political achievement. The 300 warriors who stood at Thermopylae were not random volunteers. They were the hippes, the best warriors Sparta had ever produced. Rank 6. Spartiate, the citizen soldier. At 30, you finally became a full Spartan citizen. You could vote. You could eat with your family. You could own property. But the military obligation never ended. Every male Spartan citizen remained liable for active military service until the age of 60. This created something unique in the ancient world, a warrior class that never retired mentally, even when physically stepped back. The Spartiate was expected to maintain peak physical condition, continue training, and be ready for immediate deployment at any moment. Sparta's political system, the dual kingship with the Gerousia Council of Elders, was fundamentally shaped by the military values its citizens embodied. A Spartan who failed his military duties lost his citizenship, a fate considered worse than death. This created extraordinarily high social pressure to maintain standards, not through external enforcement, but through the terror of social exclusion from the only world you had ever known. Rank 7. Enematarchos, the squad commander. You now command an enomotia, a unit of 36 men who are your complete tactical responsibility. At this level, the intellectual demands of command became as important as physical performance. The Spartan phalanx was not a simple charge-forward formation. It required constant positional adjustment, gap identification, and reactive decision-making under extreme conditions. Historical accounts describe Spartan commanders receiving and processing battlefield information with almost inhuman calm, the product of decades of training that had removed panic from their responses. You also began mentoring the next generation of junior warriors, passing down not just technique, but the Spartan mentality that made technique meaningful. The most important thing you taught was not how to fight. It was how to die correctly. A Spartan who died facing the enemy was honored. A Spartan who died with wounds on his back had failed. Not just himself, but every person who had invested years in his training. Rank 8. Polmarchos, the war commander. You now command a Mora, 600 Spartan warriors, the largest tactical unit in the Spartan army. At this rank, individual combat skill became almost irrelevant. What mattered was strategic thinking at scale. You were responsible for coordinating your Mora's actions with the other 5 Morai of the full Spartan army, a complex synchronization challenge even in perfect conditions. The famous Spartan discipline paid its highest dividends at this level, because coordinating 600 men who all executed commands with perfect precision was entirely different from coordinating armies who didn't. The Battle of Plataea in 479 BC the year after Thermopylae, demonstrated this perfectly. 8,000 Spartan warriors and their allies broke the Persian army of Mardonius definitively. As Polemarchos, you also began the most politically sensitive aspect of high command, managing relationships with allied Greek city-states. Sparta's allies respected Spartan military excellence. They deeply resented Spartan arrogance. Your job was to extract the first without triggering the second. Rank 9. Strategos. The general, you command the entire Spartan army. Every mora, every warrior, every battle plan. The strategos was appointed by Sparta's kings. And in Sparta, the king himself often led campaigns, making the relationship between king and general one of the most complex in the ancient world. The greatest Spartan generals, figures like Brasidas and Lysander, were military innovators who expanded Spartan tactics beyond the phalanx. Brasidas, in particular, shocked the Greek world by conducting a rapid long-distance campaign in Thrace that no one thought a Spartan army capable of, demonstrating that the Agoge's lessons extended far beyond simple discipline. At this rank, political considerations dominated military ones. Every campaign was as much about Sparta's long-term position in Greece as about winning the immediate battle. The loneliness of command at this level was total. Every decision that killed men was yours alone, but so was every decision that saved them. Rank 10. Dionychus, the legend. This rank doesn't appear in any official Spartan hierarchy. It's what history gave to those who defined what Spartan meant. Leonidas is the most famous, but perhaps the most perfectly Spartan was a warrior named Dionychus. When a Persian messenger warned that the Persian army's arrows would block out the sun, Dionychus smiled and said, "Good, then we will fight in the shade." That response, calm, practical, completely devoid of fear, is the most perfectly documented expression of what the Agoge was designed to produce. The Agoge didn't just train warriors, it produced a specific kind of human being, one for whom fear had been systematically replaced by competence and acceptance. Figures like Leonidas, Dionychus, and Pausanias became legendary, not because they were invincible, Thermopylae ended in Spartan deaths, but because they demonstrated what human beings are capable of when trained without limit. From a 7-year-old boy taken from his mother by the state, to a name still spoken 2,500 years later whenever human beings want to describe the absolute limit of courage. That is the life of a Spartan warrior. The Spartans weren't superhuman. They were a city of 20,000 people who made a collective decision to pour every resource into producing the most effective warriors possible. The Agoge was brutal, uncompromising, and produced human beings whose capacity for disciplined action under impossible conditions has never been matched. 10 ranks. A lifetime of iron discipline, a legacy that 2,500 years of history has never stopped studying. Next week on Shroudex. Explain your life at every rank in the SCP Foundation. Subscribe so you don't miss it.